Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Ow! Okay, we'll start with this. A very revealing tweet from Steve Kim reads, "Heard something interesting. Last week in Miami, Gilberto Ramirez met with Eddie Hearn in a fight with Deontay Bivol was discussed. Word is that his asking price for that fight was exorbitant, and those talks went to Bolivian, I think he meant Bolivian, real fast. And this does seem in keeping with Zurdo Ramirez's movements as of late. You know, he got rid of his old trainer, he got rid of his old manager, he's managing himself now. There were rumblings that he was trying to get out of his top-ranked situation.
There were rumors.
I speculated in one or two previous videos that perhaps what Zurdo is doing is trying to test out his market value and trying to see what the people over there at Matchroom are willing to pay him to cross over to their side of things, thereby making a Deontay Bivol fight a possibility. And it does seem like there was some substance to that, some substance to my previous speculations as far as what's going on with Zurdo, and what is it that he's trying to do, because there are a lot of opportunities for him right there where he is, but he's moving in the opposite direction of those opportunities. Perhaps he feels that the risks are too great, given top-ranked stable fighters at 175, where he's currently campaigning. Perhaps he feels that the risks are actually greater than the rewards. That, you know, you can fight a better beef for those 2 world titles, but how big of a money fight is that? Or you can fight a former champion in an Alexander Vosdik, but it's a risky fight. He's a very well-balanced fighter, in spite of what Artur did to him. I still view Alexander as one of the best and brightest fighters in the division. There's no shame in losing to another world champion. And that's a fight that Zurdo could have had. I mean, there are lots of fights right there for Zurdo to have. It's just that those are very risky fights where the money's not so great. In order to get to that great money, however, you've got to pay your dues. You know, it's not just going to happen on its own.
Yeah.
Zurdo's reign at 168, it didn't lend itself to his marquee value overall, because there are a lot of things that just didn't happen down there. You know, that he was a champion for a while, but, you know, in the realm of big fights and big opportunities that would add to his marquee value, thereby justifying his asking price, those kinds of situations never happened. So here today, at 175, he's just a contender. He's not a champion, he's not a titleist, he's not bringing a belt over to the Matchroom side of things, and perhaps that's why his asking price seemed exorbitant to the people over there at Matchroom. That, you know, you're not bringing a whole lot to the table, you're not bringing a host of fans, and you're not bringing a world title, so what you're asking for, it's not gonna happen.
Not at that price.
I don't know what Zurdo's gonna do at this point. I really don't. He seems stuck between a rock and a hard place, because he's in a very dangerous division with a lot of dangerous fighters, and he doesn't want to dip his toe in the pool. But you've already moved up. You don't really have much of a choice. And for what you're doing up here at 175, you might as well have stayed down there at 168 and saw about having that Callum Smith fight. For a short while, that was a conversation. That looked like something that could have happened. Bear in mind, this is before Zurdo vacated the WBO title. You know, it would have been a unification match. It would have been, could have been, Zurdo's biggest fight. And that could have lended itself to his marquee value. As we all know, that never happened. So here at 175, what's he actually bringing to the table?
Not a lot.
You know, Zurdo's a Mexican fighter. And the Mexican fans here in America, they really do move the needle. I mean, they really are
Ever present.
among the more supportive fans you can come across, at least in this part of the world. Zurdo doesn't have their command the way that a Canelo does, the way that a Gallo Estrada does, I dare say, the way that a Miguel Berchelt does. And I think it's because Zurdo, unlike those fighters, he just hasn't had the big fights. You know, Gallo Estrada has been involved in some important situations. The same is true of Miguel Berchelt, more or less, that he's had a very respectable reign as the WBC champion at 130. And that is what commands those fans' respect, that they can distinguish the game fighters from the not-so-game fighters. I mean, you would think that in a division where you don't often see a Mexican-born champion like 168, you would think that he would command more of their support, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. I don't see him having their backing the way some other fighters do. And I think it's because of what situations have not happened that would captivate their attention. The only way that that's going to come to pass is if he has those dangerous fights with those dangerous fighters at 175, because I'll tell you, you're not going to win him over fighting more Tommy Karpensis, all right?
Not gonna cut it.
That's just not going to cut it. It seems that things really aren't going to plan for Zurdo.
They're not.
When it comes to Matchroom, at least. So what's the plan B, you know? What do? You go back to Top Rank, you're going to have to fight somebody, and they've got most of the somebodies. I mean, they really do. We'll see what happens with Zurdo, but like I said, he really does appear to be stuck between a rock and a hard place, because there's no way that he can really move forward without taking a risk. A big risk, a considerable risk. But you know, that's what it's going to take. In heavyweight news, get a whiff of this. Dillian Whyte threatens to embarrass Deontay Wilder. The WBC need to speak to him because I'll start publishing documents and then he'll be really embarrassed. Dillian Whyte has laughed off Deontay Wilder's claims that he's a liar and has official documents to prove that he tried to force a fight with the WBC champion. Deontay Wilder needs to relax and behave himself, Whyte told Sky Sports. The WBC need to speak to him because I'll start publishing documents and then he'll be really embarrassed. I'll actually publish WBC documents showing that I requested and accepted these fights and have agreed to these fights, and everyone knew. I was mandated to fight Brazil and Tyson Fury at my insistence. We made the fight with Brazil, and then the WBC pulled him out to fight Deontay Wilder. How can he say I didn't want to fight Dominic Brazil? I've made loads of offers to Ortiz over the years, and he's turned them all down. Facts, not fiction. I want to fight Deontay Wilder. That's who I want to fight. I don't care about no one else, apart from him, and he needs to stop being a coward. I've got a better resume than him. I've beaten more world champions than him. I've been ranked #1 challenger since 2017 before his first fake mandatory against Bemain Stavern. And I've been trying to chase him for 1,000,000 days now. He says I'm garbage. He says I'm a liar. He says I'm a phony. He says this and that. But then he doesn't want to man up and fight me and just cherry picks easy defenses and his own mandatories. He's the most protected and cowardly heavyweight champion in the history of the sport. As far as what's next for Dillian Whyte, he was quoted as saying, "It looks like it's going to be Povetkin. I think he's a better opponent than Andy Ruiz because one thing about Povetkin is he will come in shape and he will be motivated to fight. I just want to get a high-level guy to fight." You know, we've touched on this subject many times here on the channel.
Yeah.
Presented the corroborating evidence of Dillian Whyte's efforts to pin down a fight with Deontay Wilder.
Yeah.
He spent the last 2-3 years trying to get a fight with that guy to no avail. The fight itself remains elusive. So at this point, anybody questioning the earnestness of Dillian Whyte's efforts either needs to have their head examined or is likely making excuses for Deontay Wilder to continue to deprive him of a world title opportunity. And it's the strangest thing because even I think Wilder stands a good chance of knocking out Dillian Whyte. I mean, even I would say that, you know, given Dillian Whyte's implementation, I'm not sure that he can avoid the right hand for the full course. I'm not sure of that. I wouldn't bet on it.
It's not a lock.
But I still feel that he deserves the fight. I think he's done enough, and apparently Wilder does not. How's it possible that Tyson Fury, you know, after February 22nd, will have fought Deontay Wilder 2 times? How's it possible that Luis Ortiz has already fought Deontay Wilder 2 times, where Dillian Whyte hasn't fought him once, hasn't gotten the chance, even though he's gone through the proper channels? How's it possible? You want to convince people that he's the baddest man on the planet. He's the biggest puncher in a division, probably one of the biggest punches in the history of the sport. You want to convince people of this when you try to sell us this guy. But it's a hard sell so long as Dillian Whyte is out there still campaigning for a title shot that in all likelihood he may never get. It's very hard to believe that Wilder is what his fans, his people say he is whilst this is going on. You know, this is a separate issue from the Joshua shit, you know, from the Wilder versus Joshua shit. This is a separate issue. This has more to do with Wilder's obligations as a champion, yet many of Wilder's fans treat both those situations as if they are one situation, when, look, Dillian Whyte ain't sweet on Anthony Joshua any more than he's sweet on Deontay Wilder, okay? These are separate matters, separate issues that require reconciliation.
Exactly.
Can't tell me this guy's the baddest man on the planet or he's this dangerous puncher in the history of the sport so long as Dillian Whyte runs around deprived of a title opportunity. You can't. What's even more bizarre is that, yeah, Wilder stands a chance of knocking this guy out. But it's not as simple as just him standing a chance of knocking him out. It's also the fact that he could stand to make a substantial amount of money here and now.
He could.
If he took that fight. Could you imagine how many asses they could put in the seats with that fight over there in the UK? Could you imagine? That would probably be one of the few times Wilder sold out a venue.
I know, right?
You stage that thing in the O2 Arena. Given the backstory, that the backdrop, the stage, it's already set. Okay, Dillian Whyte finally getting the shot that he's been working towards for years now. You could sell a lot of tickets with this thing. You could sell a lot of pay-per-views with this thing. And Wilder, you know, for the most part, he would get the lion's share of the pie.
Yeah, that's fair.
He's the reigning champion, you understand? I mean, he could stand to make a substantial amount of money. I don't think it's a stretch, any stretch of the imagination to say that Wilder could
win this fight,
make a lot of money with this fight, and they could sell upwards of 1 million pay-per-views over there in the UK with this fight. I think they could. I think they could. Because a lot of people in the UK, more so than others, know what's going on. They see the travesty, the trials and tribulations of Dillian Whyte, and they sympathize. It is for this reason that many of the fans over there resent Deontay Wilder as much as they do. It's not just the Joshua stuff, it's this stuff too. And I reiterate, these are separate matters, separate issues.
Individually.
What you got going on with Anthony Joshua don't got a goddamn fucking thing to do with Dillian Whyte, because Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua aren't bosom buddies to begin with, nor have they ever been.
Separate issues.
These issues are mutually exclusive. So when I see Dillian Whyte saying what he's saying, as far as publishing documents that would expose Deontay Wilder to the boxing community, show them what's really going on, I don't even think that's necessary at this point, because, you know, people don't need convincing of this. They're already convinced that Deontay Wilder is working with the WBC to deprive Dillian Whyte of this opportunity, to deprive him really of this right, because he's climbed his way up the ranks. He's been number one for the longest time, and now it seems like they're just waiting for someone to come along and pick him off. They just don't want it to be Wilder for some reason, yet he's supposed to be this dangerous guy. I guess he's not dangerous enough for Dillian Whyte. At this point, it's not about convincing people of what's happening. At this point, the people are already convinced. At this point, it's more of a question of who does Wilder, the WBC, and all his supporters, who are they trying to kid? Who are they trying to fool? We can see you don't want to give that guy a title shot. The question is why? If it's as easy as you guys say it is, Wilder would have done it already, because he would have made more money fighting Dillian Whyte than he just made fighting Luis Ortiz for a second time. Oh yeah. I don't think it's any stretch of the imagination to say that in the UK that would have been a highly successful event, highly successful pay-per-view that would have sold out a lot of tickets. I don't think that's a stretch at all. But, you know, there's barely any new ground to cover here. Just an ongoing saga that we're all fully acquainted with.
I talked to Gervonta Tank Davis, the trainer, and he said the reason that they didn't want to fight you is because you couldn't sell. What is it going to take for you to get him in the ring?
For him to grow some necks. For his team to grow some cojones. And stop acting like a sucker. The sport of boxing is getting weak. A lot of the fighters are getting weak. Like I said, I'll answer the call to anybody. If somebody say they want to fight me, I'm a man at the end of the day. We're going to fight. I don't care if you're 200 pounds. If you say you want to fight me, you better put your hands up, because we're going to rumble. That's just the type of individual that I am. I feel as though as a fighter, that's the type of attitude and mindset that you're supposed to have as a fighter. What type of stuff is that to say, well, I don't want to fight him because it don't sell? You sound like a sucker. You sound like a sucker. You mean to tell me because I'm telling you I want to fight you, you picking and choosing who you want to fight? Come on, man. I ain't trying to hear that. That's really what's going on.
First off, I want to congratulate Gary Russell for this weekend's title defense, a title defense that I wasn't sure he was going to make it through. You know, I actually picked Tug to win that fight. I got 3 out of 4 predictions right this weekend, and it just so happened that Gary's is the one I got wrong. I want to congratulate him for being able to hang on to his title. But in reference to what he's talking about, what he's saying in a very general sense, there's a lot of truth being said here. That, you know, the whole idea that you can put
certain fights,
the competitive element of boxing on the back burner behind the guise of boxing being a business is farcical. I mean, it really is. When, yes, boxing is a business like all sports are a business, you know. The MLB, the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, those are all businesses. All of those organizations and their conjoining franchises are businesses. But they never stop being sports as a result of them being businesses. It is very clear what these different organizations are selling you, what they're selling the paying public. Whereas in boxing, You often hear it said that boxing is a business as an excuse for fighters not to have certain fights. In this instance, it's being said that Gervonta Davis and Gary Russell shouldn't fight because, well, Gary doesn't sell that many tickets. As opposed to who? Francisco Fonseca?
Huh?
Hugo Ruiz?
Huh?
Jesus Cuellar? Muñez? What, these are big ticket sellers? No, they're not. So that's not the real reason that they don't want to fight Gary Russell. I mean, it can't be because they fought all those guys, and those guys sell even less tickets than Gary does, but they willingly fought them, whereas they have some kind of an aversion to fighting him. What is it that they're really trying to circumvent here? Now, I want to make this clear. I'm not advocating for or against the fight between Gary and Gervonta so much as highlighting the inconsistencies, that there is a lot of truth in what Gary is saying. That
Some sucker shit.
these guys, they want to pick and choose, and that goes against the very nature of a fighter's mentality, that after a while it's not even competitive, you know? And that's really what these guys are trying to circumvent, you understand, that if it were just about not being a ticket seller, you wouldn't have spent the last 2 years fighting those guys, because those guys don't sell tickets, yet you fought them anyway. But when it comes to Gary, all of a sudden, you act like you're too good to fight that guy.
Because he don't sell.
And you know what? Maybe it's not because he doesn't sell that many tickets. Maybe it's just because you figure that you'd have a harder time with Gary than you would with the guys that you've been handpicking, you know? Maybe that's what it is. And in that way, it goes against a fighter's nature, the essence of a fighter and what it means to be a fighter. That a fighter, a genuine bona fide fighter, thrives in competition, whereas these guys are anything but fighters because they don't want to compete. They just want to have things their way. I think that's more or less what Gary Russell was trying to communicate, what he was trying to say, and I just so happen to agree. I think there's a lot of truth in what he said. However, I could actually see Gary getting that Gervonta Davis fight sometime down the line. Maybe not right away, but I could see it happening because, you know, Gary Russell, he's a good fighter at 126, but even at 126, he's on the smaller end of the spectrum. He's a naturally smaller guy than Gervonta Davis. And it just so happens that, you know, fighting those kind of fighters is right up Gervonta Davis's alley. I mean, these are the kind of fighters that they use to try to accent his finer qualities to help make him look good. So at some point, maybe 2 to 3 fights from now, I could see that fight happening. Maybe when Gary slows down a bit and looks less than formidable, then Gervonta Davis and his people might be open to the idea. But in that way, that proves more or less that Gary's right, that these guys don't want someone to have to compete with. They don't want to have to be in there with someone who's going to resist, to pose some resistance. They just want to have things their way. And in that way, it goes against what it is to be a fighter, what it is to be a competitor, because a competitor welcomes competition. They don't shy away from it. They don't shy away from it in all the ways that we've been seeing Gervonta Davis and his people shying away from it for at least 2-3 years now. Bottom line, Gary's right.